One inmate inside this prison hid a body in a suitcase and travelled hundreds of miles with it. Another entered prison as a schoolgirl after committing murder at just 12 years old. And another became one of the most notorious child killers in British history. This is HMP Bronzefield. Located in Ashford in Middlesex, HMP Bronzefield is a Category A prison for women and one of the most secure female prisons in the United Kingdom. Opened in 2004, it is also the largest women's prison in Europe, with space for more than 500 inmates. Among its facilities is a 12-bed mother and baby unit, allowing some mothers to care for their babies up until 18 months old while serving their sentence. But while Bronzefield may look like an ordinary prison from the outside, behind its walls are some of Britain's most notorious female offenders, from murderers to the ringleader of a child predator network. These are just some of the inmates currently housed inside HMP Bronzefield. The brutality of this murder convinced detectives they were looking for a dangerous male adult, but they were actually searching for a 12-year-old girl. This is the case of Sharon Carr. In the early hours of the 7th of June 1992, 18-year-old apprentice hairdresser Katie Ratcliffe was walking home after a night out at Ragamuffins nightclub in Surrey, but she never made it home. Later that morning, a group of boys made a horrifying discovery near a cemetery wall in Farnborough. There, they found Katie's body, stabbed to death and sexually mutilated. The attack had been extraordinarily violent. Katie had been stabbed 32 times with a 6.5-inch kitchen knife. Some of the wounds had penetrated through her ribcage and into her heart, while others had been inflicted in intimate areas of her body, and jewellery had also been taken from Katie. Investigators quickly noticed the brutality of this murder. Katie's clothing had also been disturbed, leaving police to believe that the attack may have had a sexual motive. However, there was no evidence of a sexual assault. Because of the nature of the injuries, detectives became convinced that they were looking for an adult male offender, and as a result, the case remained unsolved for almost 2 years. Then, on the second anniversary of Katie's murder, a fellow female pupil was attacked at Collingwood College in Camberley. Without any apparent motive, Sharon Carr stabbed the student in the school toilets. The victim was stabbed in the back, suffering a punctured lung. Fortunately, 5 students entered the toilet and intervened before the attack could become even more serious. The victim told investigators that Sharon appeared happy during the assault and was smiling as it happened. That night, Sharon didn't return home. Instead, she was found the following morning within the school grounds and was arrested. As police began questioning, a deeply disturbing picture emerged. Sharon had long been obsessed with death and violence. She reportedly spoke about harming animals, admitting she enjoyed stabbing cats, and claimed to have beheaded a dog with a spade. Then, while being held at an assessment centre, her violence continued when she attempted to strangle 2 female staff members. But while awaiting trial, she was bragging about a crime that authorities had no idea that she had committed. She was heard on the phone bragging to friends and family about murdering Katie Radcliffe 2 years prior. And notes were also discovered in her diary which showed sexual excitement over Katie's death. One page read, "If only I could kill you again, I promise I would make you suffer more this time, you fucking slag. Your terrified screams turned me on." When questioned, Sharon confessed in disturbing detail. She described details of Katie's injuries that police had deliberately withheld from the public, and she also knew about a stolen bracelet, information that only the killer would have known. During a reenactment of the murder, investigators were shocked when Sharon reportedly laughed as she demonstrated what had happened. Sharon had also claimed that 2 boys had been with her on the night of Katie's murder, alleging that they helped transport Katie's body. However, neither of the 2 stood trial after providing alibis for one another. Born in Belize, Sharon had moved to England with her mum and stepfather in 1986. At the age of just 17, Sharon was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years. As she was led from the dock, she reportedly smiled. Yet, despite becoming eligible for release in 2011, Sharon still remains behind bars today. Over the years, she has repeatedly attacked prison staff and fellow inmates and regularly expressed a desire to kill. She was briefly transferred to HMP Lord Newton in County Durham, but was later moved back to Bronzefield after attacking another inmate. Sharon was just recently denied parole in August 2023. Often referred to in the media as the Devil's Daughter, Sharon remains the youngest female to have been convicted of a single murder in British history when she committed her crime at just 12 years old. More than 3 decades later, authorities still believe she remains too dangerous to release. Police received a call from a man who calmly told them that he had killed his own daughter. When officers arrived at the address, they found the body of 10-year-old Sara Sharif inside an otherwise empty house. This is the case of Beinash Batool. If you've watched the Franklin video, you may remember this case through Sara's father, Irfan Sharif. This time though, we're looking at the role that his wife played, Beinash Batool. On the 10th of August 2023, police entered a property in Woking in Surrey after receiving a call from Pakistan made by Sara's dad, Irfan Sharif. Inside, they found Sara's body. She was alone, and what investigators uncovered over the following days shocked even experienced detectives. Sara had suffered 71 recent injuries, including bruises and abrasions across almost every part of her body. As well as these injuries were also older injuries, evidence of abuse that had taken place over a prolonged period. A post-mortem examination also revealed 25 fractures, including injuries to her spine, ribs, collarbone, shoulder blades, hands, and her arm. Experts stated that the severity of these injuries was rare, even in traffic accidents. She was also underweight and malnourished. One of the most disturbing injuries was a burn mark consistent with the shape of an iron. The judge later concluded the injury would likely have required one person to restrain Sara while another carried it out. By the time of her death, Sara had endured years of abuse. Born in January 2013, she initially lived with her mum. However, in 2019, following allegations made against her mum, Sara and her brother moved into the care of their dad, Irfan Sharif. By then, Irfan was living with Beinash Batool, and together they were raising several children of their own. The couple had met in 2014 and were living together in Surrey by the following year. Beinash remained at home, caring for the children while Irfan worked. According to the prosecution, the abuse began not long after Sara moved into the household. The judge described how Sara was singled out from the other children. While the others were treated normally, Sara was subjected to repeated assaults, humiliation, and neglect. From the age of 6 or 7, she was expected to clean the house, do laundry, and take on caring responsibilities for her youngest brother. Eventually, she was even removed from school and educated at home, although investigators later found very little evidence that she was receiving any meaningful education at all. Evidence presented during the trial showed that Beinash was fully aware of what was happening. She had sent photos of Sara's injuries to her sisters and was aware of the abuse taking place within the home. But rather than intervening, prosecutors argued that she helped conceal it, including covering bruises with makeup. Neighbours reported hearing her shouting and swearing at Sara, and when Beinash considered Sara was being troublesome, she'd contact Irfan at work and he would come home. Beinash was well aware of what these consequences would be. Investigators also discovered bite marks on Sara's body. While other members of the household provided dental impressions, Beinash refused. The judge later concluded that she was likely responsible for the bite marks found on Sara's arm and inner thigh. Text messages recovered during the investigation also showed that Beinash claimed she believed Sara had a demon inside of her. Yet, despite everything that Sara endured, no one stepped in to protect her. On the 8th of August 2023, Sara became critically ill. Beinash contacted Irfan at work to inform him, and when he arrived home, Sara was described as floppy and barely responsive. But instead of seeking medical help, the court heard that Irfan beat her with a metal pole, believing she was pretending to be ill. Sara died shortly afterwards. Medical evidence later concluded that her death was caused by brain injuries inflicted just days earlier. Rather than calling an ambulance, Beinash, Irfan and Sara's uncle all fled to Pakistan. During sentencing, the judge said that Beinash had shown no genuine acceptance of responsibility and criticised her for standing by while Sara suffered years of abuse. 29-year-old Beinash Batool was sentenced to life imprisonment for her role in the murder of Sara Sharif, with a minimum term of 33 years. This next inmate killed her own mum, spent just 3 years in a secure hospital, then begged authorities to lock her up before she killed again. But they ignored her warnings. This is the case of Nicola Edgington. On the 4th of November 2005, 2 siblings returned home after a night out, expecting an ordinary evening. Instead, they discovered their mum, 60-year-old Sharon Edgington, stabbed to death in the home. At the scene was a journal open to a page titled Condemned People. Listed among names such as George Bush, Osama bin Laden, and Reggie Cray was the name Sharon Edgington. A cross had also been marked through it, almost as though the list was a series of completed targets. And beneath Marion's name was the name of Marion's son. The discovery immediately led investigators to suspect Marion's daughter, 26-year-old Nicola Edgington. Nicola fled and spent the next 16 days in hiding before eventually being arrested and charged with murder. She later admitted killing her mum, but pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, claiming she had no memory of the attack due to schizophrenia. The court heard that Nicola had experienced years of mental health difficulties and personal turmoil. Relationships had broken down, children had been removed from her care, and tensions with her mum had grown over issues including child custody and her inheritance. The court concluded that a combination of severe mental health illness and long-standing resentment had contributed to the killing. Following the case, Nicola was detained indefinitely under the Mental Health Act and placed in a secure psychiatric hospital. Many believed that she would never be released, but just 3 years later, doctors concluded that her treatment had been successful. In 2009, she was released back into the community under a conditional discharge. Her brother and sister had strongly opposed the decision, warning authorities that she remained dangerous, but their concerns were ignored. According to later investigations, medical staff had downplayed Nicola's aggressive behaviour, failed to properly assess the risks she posed, and did not give sufficient weight to warnings from her family. Then in October 2011, Nicola suffered a serious psychotic relapse. Over the course of several hours, she contacted emergency services 4 times and attended 2 different hospitals. She repeatedly told professionals that she felt she was going to kill someone. At one stage, she reportedly told police, "I've had a nervous breakdown before, and I killed someone." Despite the seriousness of her warnings, though, opportunities to intervene were repeatedly missed. Police failed to carry out checks that would have revealed her previous conviction, and medical staff failed to adequately supervise her. She told nurses that she was hearing voices, that she hadn't slept for weeks, and wanted to be sectioned. She even requested to be restrained because she was struggling to restrain herself from harming someone else. Yet she remained in the community. After leaving a mental health unit, Nicola travelled by bus to Bexley Heath in South London. CCTV later captured her and Asda purchasing a large kitchen knife. Shortly afterwards, she launched an unprovoked attack on 22-year-old Kerry Clark at a bus stop. Fortunately, Kerry managed to fight back and disarm her attacker. But Nicola wasn't finished. She entered a nearby butcher's, stole a meat cleaver, and went searching for another victim. She soon encountered 58-year-old Sally Hodkin, a grandmother and law accounts clerk who was walking home from work. Without warning, Nicola launched a second unprovoked attack. Sally suffered catastrophic injuries and died at the scene. At this point, Nicola was 32 years old. During the trial, prosecutors argued that although Nicola suffered from mental illness, her actions that day had been deliberate and driven by anger and frustration after feeling ignored by medical professionals. The jury rejected her defence of diminished responsibility and was convicted of the murder of Sally Hodkin and the attempted murder of Kerry Clark. The judge described her as manipulative and extremely dangerous. Nicola Edgington, now known as Nicola Thomas, was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 37 years. Police investigating an abandoned burning car found £2,000 in cash, dozens of mobile phones, a live cat, and a decomposing placenta. What they didn't find was the newborn baby that they had already feared had recently been born. This is the case of Constance Marten. On the 5th of January 2023, emergency services were called to a vehicle engulfed in flames on the hard shoulder of the M61 near Bolton. Inside, investigators discovered a bizarre collection of items. There was cash, 34 cheap mobile phones, a woman's passport, and a live cat. But the most alarming discovery was a decomposing placenta. The passport belonged to Constance Marten, a woman already at the centre of a nationwide search alongside her partner Mark Gordon. The placenta immediately confirmed authorities' worst fears. Somewhere there was a newborn baby and nobody knew where she was. For weeks, Constance and Mark had been living off the grid. Despite having access to money, the couple avoided hotels and official accommodation, instead moving around the country, sleeping rough, staying in tents, and scavenging through bins to avoid being detected. Police and social services already knew the pair very well. Before the birth of this baby, 4 other children had been removed from their care. Authorities had repeatedly raised concerns about the children's welfare and the couple's volatile relationship, including an incident in which Constance fell from a first-floor window while pregnant. The concerns stretched back years. Born into a wealthy family with connections to British aristocracy, Constance repeatedly told friends that she had played with Prince William and Harry during her childhood. Her life changed dramatically, though, after she met Mark Gordon in an incense shop in Tottenham. The pair began a relationship and backpacked through South America before returning to the UK, expecting their first child. Almost immediately, professionals became concerned. Constance avoided antenatal appointments, gave inconsistent information about where she was living, and eventually stopped attending appointments altogether. Medical staff became so concerned that alerts were circulated to hospitals across the country. When she eventually gave birth, the couple used false names and reportedly adopted a fake Irish accent. Police were called, leading to a confrontation in which Mark assaulted 2 officers. As the years passed, concerns only intensified. Questions were repeatedly raised about the couple's ability to care for their children safely. 1 child was removed, then another, and by 2021, 4 children had been removed from their care. When Constance became pregnant again in 2022, the couple feared that their 5th child would also be taken. Instead of engaging with authorities, they disappeared. For months, they moved between temporary accommodation before eventually living in a tent as the birth approached. During the nationwide search, CCTV captured the pair carrying a newborn baby through freezing winter conditions. The child appeared to have no hat, no blanket or socks, and the buggy wasn't suitable for a newborn. Yet, despite repeated appeals from police, the couple refused to reveal their location. Eventually, on the 27th of February 2023, officers located and arrested them in Brighton. But there was one problem. Their baby was missing. When questioned, neither parent would tell officers where she was. But days later, police made a devastating discovery. Inside a shed near where the couple had been arrested was a little bag for life covered with rubbish and soil. Inside the bag was the body of baby Victoria. She had been wrapped in a pink blanket and was only a few weeks old. According to Constance, Victoria had died after she fell asleep while breastfeeding inside her jacket. When she awoke, she claimed that Victoria was unresponsive. The couple said that they attempted to revive her, but they were unsuccessful. But rather than reporting the death, they carried Victoria's body with them in a bag, including a trip to the beach. The court heard that they considered burying or cremating her remains before abandoning those plans. During the trial, the jury also heard details of Mark Gordon's violent past. At just 14 years old, and while living in the United States at the time, he was convicted of raping a neighbour at knife point while her young children slept nearby. The following month, he carried out another violent attack, armed with a shovel. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison, but was released after serving around 20 years before being deported back to the United Kingdom and placed on the sex offenders register. Throughout the proceedings, Mark blamed the authorities for Victoria's death, claiming that the police pursuit had forced the couple to live in a tent. But the judge disagreed, describing the pair as selfish and arrogant individuals. He said that caught in the middle of their toxic relationship was a baby who was not being cared for properly. Constance Marten was convicted of child cruelty, concealing the birth of a child, perverting the course of justice, and the manslaughter of baby Victoria. Mark Gordon was sentenced to 14 years in prison with an extended period of 4 years. Constance Marten was also sentenced to 14 years in prison. This next inmate was accused of murdering and decapitating her friend after a promised £200,000 never arrived. This is the case of Jemma Mitchell. In 2020, Jemma Mitchell became friends with 67-year-old Deborah Chong through their church in London. Originally from Malaysia, Deborah had lived in the UK for more than 30 years. Friends described her as having a sweet, childlike nature, and over time, she became extremely close to Jemma. Hundreds of messages later, recovered by investigators, showed the pair were in regular contact and had developed a strong friendship. And at the time, Jemma was facing major financial pressures. Originally from Australia, she was having renovation work done on a £4 million home in Wembley, a home that had been in the family for generations. The project involved adding an extra floor, but the work had gone badly wrong. The court heard that the builders had taken around £230,000 while leaving much of the project unfinished. Knowing about Jemma's difficulties, Deborah offered to help. She offered to give Jemma £200,000 towards the renovations. But just days before her death, Deborah withdrew this offer. Instead, she advised Jemma to sell the property and enjoy the money rather than continue pouring funds into the project. Prosecutors would later argue that this rejection provided the motive for murder. On the morning of the 11th of June 2021, Jemma left her home carrying a large suitcase that appeared to be empty. She travelled by public transport to Deborah's address and remained there for around 5 hours. When she left, the suitcase appeared significantly heavier, and she was also carrying a second suitcase. Investigators later discovered that the second suitcase contained documents belonging to Deborah, including her passport, driving licence, and her bank cards. Later that same day, Jemma attended hospital with a fractured finger, claiming she had trapped it in a car door. The following day, Deborah was reported missing by her lodger. Rather than helping locate her friend, Jemma attempted to create a false trail. She sent an email to a missing persons charity claiming that Deborah had gone away to spend time with family. Then, after having Deborah's body at her home for 2 weeks, Jemma hired a car for a single day. CCTV captured her transporting a large suitcase that appeared so heavy that she required a trolley to move it from her home to the vehicle. She then drove more than 200 miles from London to Salcombe in Devon. But during the journey, her plans took a turn when she suffered a punctured tyre and called out the AA. The mechanic who attended later recalled a strange smell coming from the vehicle. Eventually, Jemma left Deborah's body at the bottom of some steps, beside a public footpath near some woodland. The following afternoon, holidaymakers made a horrifying discovery. The case became even more disturbing when investigators realised that Deborah's head had also been removed. And to this day, no definitive explanation has ever been established as to why. Several days later, her head was found around 10 metres away, under dense vegetation further down the slope. Due to the extent of decomposition, pathologists couldn't determine an exact cause of death. However, Deborah had suffered a fractured skull and multiple fractured ribs. As investigators focused on Jemma, they covered a series of extraordinary discoveries. Jemma was a qualified osteopath who had studied anatomy and stated on her professional website that she had experience dissecting human bodies. Police also discovered what appeared to be a will belonging to Deborah. According to the document, 95% of Deborah's estate would be left to Jemma, with the remaining 5% going to Gemma's mum. The estate was estimated to be worth around £700,000. But this was, of course, completely fake. Investigators found forged signatures throughout the document, including that of a neighbour who had died months earlier. Following the neighbour's death, Jemma had gained access to his room and taken various possessions, including his mobile phone. She later reactivated the phone and used it to arrange the hire car that she would later drive to Devon. In an attempt to avoid detection, she also took the neighbour's phone with her while leaving her own phone at home. On the 6th of July 2021, Jemma Mitchell was arrested.
Right. Hand just over to your hands. Alright, Jemma, at this moment I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. Okay, you don't have to say anything, but you may have a defence, do not mention one question, something which you later rely in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence, okay? Once we're in the cuffs.
Am I allowed to?
I'll go explain everything to you. Okay?
Should I get some shoes?
Sorry. What?
If you want one sec.
Prosecutors argued that she had murdered and decapitated her friend in an attempt to inherit her estate after Deborah withdrew her offer of financial support. But the defence disputed this, pointing to Jemma's ownership of a multi-million-pound property and £93,000 in savings. But the jury was unconvinced. Jemma Mitchell was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 34 years. Throughout the proceedings, she maintained her innocence and has continued to deny responsibility for Deborah's death. 5 children were passed between adults for years, becoming so accustomed to the abuse that they believed it was normal. This is the case of Marie Black. One judge would later tell her that the children she targeted had been subjected to abuse beyond most people's imagination, and according to investigators, she wasn't acting alone. By the time this case came to light, police had uncovered what they described as an organised child predator ring involving 10 adults, and at the centre of it was Marie Black. The abuse began in 2002, not long after Marie met and married her then husband, Jason Adams. The couple would go on to have 5 children together before separating in 2008 after their relationship became abusive. Following the separation, Marie entered another relationship with Michael Rogers. Both of these men would later stand trial alongside her. Over the next decade, 5 children, 2 boys and 3 girls, all under the age of 13, were repeatedly abused by members of this group, both sexually and physically. Investigators discovered that the adults organised gatherings in properties across Norwich and London area where the children were treated as toys rather than human beings. According to evidence in court, the adults used cards to decide who would target which child, and even offered children as prizes in raffles. The victims were also forced to take part in acts with one another, as well as with the adults involved in the group. The abuse became so frequent that some of the children later told investigators they believed it was normal and assumed that everybody did it. The allegations were first reported in 2010. However, it would take years for investigators to gather sufficient evidence. Finally, in December 2012, enough material had been disclosed for police to move the investigation forward, leading to a series of arrests in 2013. What followed was one of the most disturbing trials of its kind. During sentencing, the judge told Marie, "You use the children for your own and for others' sexual gratification." He also stated, in their tender years, these children were subjected to sexual abuse beyond most people's imagination by adults they believed were telling the truth. Jason Adams and Michael Rogers were each sentenced to 24 years in prison for their role in the case and were ordered to serve a minimum of 16 years before becoming eligible for parole. Marie Black, a 34-year-old mum of 6, was convicted of 23 offences, including rape, conspiracy to rape, and inciting a child to engage in sexual activity. The judge sentenced her to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years. As the sentence was delivered, Marie was reportedly sobbing uncontrollably in the dock before shouting that she had been stitched up. This final inmate was convicted of murdering some of the most vulnerable victims imaginable, newborn babies, in her care. Yet, even today, many believe that she should never have been convicted at all. This is the case of Lucy Letby. Between 2015 and 2016, Lucy Letby was working as a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital. She cared for premature and critically ill newborn babies, some of the most vulnerable patients in the country. That same year, she gained additional qualifications, allowing her to take care of the sickest infants on the unit. At first, nothing appeared unusual, but over time, staff began noticing a disturbing pattern. Babies who had previously been stable, and in some cases improving, were suddenly suffering unexpected collapses. Some tragically died, and others survived after emergency intervention. Doctors struggled to find medical explanations, but as concerns grew, investigators would later claim that one name appeared again and again: Lucy Letby. Several of the incidents involved twins, and in one case, triplets. Some babies were even allegedly targeted more than once. Prosecutors later argued that Lucy took opportunities when colleagues were absent or distracted, carrying out attacks when she was less likely to be interrupted. What initially appeared to be unexplained medical emergencies eventually became a criminal investigation. At trial, prosecutors alleged that Lucy had deliberately harmed babies in multiple ways, including injecting air into their bloodstream, poisoning them with insulin, and administering excessive amounts of milk. The prosecutors argued that these attacks had been carefully disguised as natural medical collapses. Then, when police searched Lucy's room, they uncovered further evidence that prosecutors said pointed towards her guilt. Among the items recovered were confidential nursing documents that should never have left the hospital. Investigators also found handwritten notes. One contained the words, "I am evil, I did this." Police further discovered that Lucy had searched online for the parents of the babies involved in the investigation, looking them up on social media after the incidents occurred. Throughout the case, Lucy denied deliberately harming any child. She insisted she only ever tried to help the babies in her care and maintained that she had done nothing wrong. However, the jury ultimately rejected her defence. In total, Lucy Letby was convicted of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 others. In 2023, she was sentenced to a whole life order, ensuring she will spend the rest of her life in prison. However, unlike many of the other inmates covered in this video, significant controversy continues to surround her case. Since her conviction, a number of medical experts, academics, and campaigners have questioned whether the evidence presented to the jury proves that any crimes actually took place. An international panel of neonatal and paediatric specialists later reviewed the medical evidence and argued that they could find no medical evidence supporting deliberate harm. Instead, they suggested that natural complications, undiagnosed illnesses, and failures in hospital care could explain the collapses and deaths. Critics have also argued that the investigation focused heavily on incidents where Lucy was present, while failing to fully examine wider issues affecting the neonatal unit at the time. Others have pointed to previous disputes between Lucy and senior doctors, noting that she had successfully challenged concerns raised against her before the criminal investigation began. But despite these arguments, her convictions remained in place. Whether history ultimately views Lucy Letby as one of Britain's most prolific child killers, or as the victim of a major miscarriage of justice, remains the subject of fierce debate. But for now, she remains incarcerated at Bronzefield under a whole life order, meaning she is expected to spend the rest of her life in prison.